All right. Good morning as we begin our child safety training for 2024. I'm going to open in a word of prayer. Lord, I just pray that you would bless this time, that you would take and help us to truly understand the importance of what we're doing here, Lord, that we keep our children safe. Lord, I just pray these things in your name. Amen. As we move to our next slide here, we are starting our child safety workshop, presentation, training, whatever you want to call it specifically. It's not an insurance workshop. Now, the reason why we sometimes think about this as an insurance workshop is because a lot of places, such as a lot of the information we get is from insurance companies. But that's only because they have the information on when things have all gone wrong. If we look at what problems the insurance companies focus on, if this was an insurance company problem on the next slide, they focus on the cost of a loss as we take and continue to move forward. They're going to look at just what the monetary cost is. Whereas we are going to take and be looking at things like the pain, suffering, loss, all of these different things. The loss of witness in our community as well, if something were to happen to children under our care. These are a whole lot more pressing issues for us than the financial point. So it's not an insurance company workshop. This is going to be a workshop that we're taking and working through from principles, because we know in several scriptural principles, as we move, again, one more slide forward, as we look at Job chapter 1, where Satan was going to and fro, and then if we look in 1 Peter 5:8, I'm going to take and go there, especially since that one's fresher in my mind. The adversary of the devil prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. We don't want to be a place that is easy and simple to be a place to be devoured that way. We've seen the potential places where Satan could cause trouble, has caused trouble for a number of ministries. And it can be hard for a ministry to come back from either improper issues or even the allegations of impropriety. So we're going to take and be working through how can we protect against having an attack in these areas. Again, not that one would be absolutely, we can't prevent an attack. We can prevent an attack from having a valid basis. So as we move on, we're going to take and work through some basic principles. Then we're going to run through our policy specifically. Next slide. As we work through, again, denying opportunities to Satan. All right, let's keep on moving through the slides. Look at how we accomplish this. We're going to prevent the occurrence. That is our primary goal. They say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's especially true in this, because we want to make sure that we prevent it. It's not just that we want to treat the problem. We do not want to have this for all those reasons that we talked about at the beginning. The first thing is to pray. To pray over our children's ministry, things of that nature. If we're not praying over it, then we've taken advocated the first line of defense. Prayer is powerful. Secondly is to take ownership of the safety of our ministry, to be actually actively looking at some of these safety points and not just say, well, it's that person's job, it's that person's job. If we're involved in the ministry, it's all of our jobs to make sure. And today, we're going to learn some ways to prevent avoidable occurrences. As we move on here, we're going to take and talk about a couple of different topics as we take and bring those up on the slides as well. Sexual misconduct and youth activities and security. So these are both different points of safety. The one is specifically based in children's ministries, more so the sexual misconduct, but also we'll touch on a little bit of security as well. So church sexual misconduct. What is, or child sexual misconduct, what is it? This is a working definition. This is not the official legal definition from the state of Arizona or a court, but this is what we are trying to prevent when we talk about our policies. In fact, that's what our policy is called, is the Child Abuse Prevention Policy. Is anything that an adult does with a minor to obtain sexual gratification, regardless of the willingness of the minor. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a willing participant or not. There are, it just has no place. All right, let's take and continue to move on. So what's the problem? And what's the prevention that we're going to take and deal with? Problem. Sexual abuse, child sexual misconduct, is a huge problem in our country, but also around the world. Just as the statistics from our own country state, about 1 in 6 Americans have had some sort of sexual abuse, child sexual misconduct in America. So again, that is a huge number, and it could even be low because not everyone reports and talks about this. So it's rampant, and we could think, well, I'm glad we're not in, name your location, in the big city or in this big place where this is going to happen. But the thing is, it happens everywhere. We're not immune to it. The moment we think that, well, we are going to be, one of the, we're going to be one where that just doesn't happen here, that's immediately when these bad things happen, is when you think it can't happen there. As we continue on down with the problem, again, at least 1% of ministries will have a misconduct claim. So, again, on the one hand, 1%, that's still 1% too many, and we could be part of that 1%. As we keep on through the issues here. So, again, 20% will have an allegation, and 1% it finds to be actually true. All right, one more slide. Now, here's an interesting thing that we'll take. We've been talking about this as child abuse prevention. 20%, 1/5 of all the sexual predators in ministries are 18 years old or younger. Now, this goes to the point of why we don't have children unsupervised just as the children, because we're not just protecting them against adults. Other kids have issues, whether it's just simply, I don't want to say the term specifically, but sort of a standard bullying that happens, or it is something of a sexualized nature. This is why you'll see in a lot of times, you won't just have an open playground without a monitor, things of that nature. We don't often think about it, but they are there. And again, at 1/5, that's a pretty big number. Next. Keep on going. So we're going to take a look a little bit about what happens. How do these molesters get into these situations? How is it that you get a molester that comes into the church? Well, one of the things is we're going to take a focus on behavioral patterns, not personality profiles. For instance, there isn't like a personality profile that just says, oh, I'm not going to be. You could have someone who's very introverted, very small. They don't have a whole huge social outpouring kind of a thing, and they can be a molester. You could have someone who is everybody's friend and just the life of the party, who could also be a molester. Because when you think about it, of how people think about personality profiles, most offenders do not follow those norms, follow those different personalities. Because anytime you have a molester that takes and comes, what's one of the first things you always hear in an interview? Wow, it just amazes me that it was this person. They were just such a great person, and they're a molester? Because we take and get caught up on personality rather than behavioral patterns of what they actually do. Next. Again, molesters are attracted to places where there are children. This just makes sense. Because like anyone who is going to be any kind of a predator, you don't go where prey isn't. So we hope to make our place a place where there are children, but they are not prey. And again, we'll get further into, as I go back to the behavioral patterns there. What types of behaviors are we talking about? That'll take and come in a little bit later. They're a little bit different for the two different types of molesters. So we'll go to the next slide here to take and talk about our first type. The two types are the predatory and the preferential. Predatory are those who go in with a plan. They typically have a plan with usually a long-term plan to molest children. That's their goal from the very beginning. They usually have a preferred age and sex of victim. Now, on the one side, there are fewer of these molesters that just happen because, have these deep-seated predatory natures. There's fewer of them, but there are more victims because these molesters are very good at calculating and having multiple victims over time. Now we're going to talk about the other type in a minute where it talks about the situational molester, but right now we'll take a look at it here. These are the ones who appear to be the ideal workers. This is the classic case of wow, they're so great with children. Everybody likes them. They have built up and gained trust over years. Um, they're just like the perfect ideal worker. But the thing is, they begin to gain trust in that way to allow them to circumvent some of the dangers or the things. Because everybody says, oh, well, it couldn't possibly be that person. So again, they're very good at being the gatekeepers. They don't just groom their potential victims, but they'll groom the gatekeepers as well. Basically, to make the people who are supposed to be watching out not care about this person. Next bit. Situational molesters. There are more of these, but there are fewer victims because this just happens because something just happens at a potential time. They're not, these are not necessarily pre-planned. It just is like, wow, this happened. It's more preventable. For instance, if we were to take and say, bring this into a point where you have just use the situation, a teenage boy and a teenage girl and all like that, and they just happen to be, nobody's watching and they're off in a corner or off, without supervision and all like that, and they start, being friends, and then things just go beyond that, and then it goes beyond what was ever planned, and all of a sudden you have a situation. Okay? That's kind of this idea of a situational molester. They may have a bent towards this, but they're not really planning to do this. Again, that's why these are the most preventable, because again, in that situation, it's preventable because you don't have to put them in that situation where they're not, where they are not supervised. Again, we're going to harp on that multiple times, this idea of supervision, because it's one of the things that we can do, A, to make sure that we find out about anything, but also to prevent these different things. Again, if we were to go back to the idea of the predatory molester, that is where the fact of no exceptions has to come in. Because what happens with the predatory molester is they will work to gain trust so that then there is a relaxing of the guidelines because, oh, we trust that person, so that they can gain an entrance in. So, again, a point of this, not in a child sexual misconduct way, but a way of sexual misconduct, where it was determined that that is an issue, just where accountability, supervision is lowered and had unfortunate consequences, was the work over RZIM Ministries. Well, they did of course, towards the end of his ministry, and the end of his life, there were different allegations against Ravi Zacharias, who was the head of that ministry. An independent investigation, but the ministry found that there was at least some truth to these allegations of inappropriate relationships, whether in all cases, but there was at least some. And what they found, and what they recommended back and forth to the board, what they found was all of that happened because everybody trusted Ravi implicitly, like he was beyond having to worry about that. And so they relaxed the accountability procedures that they had in place at that time so that they, things that could have been preventable occurred. So it's always preventable for situational molesters because you can just prevent that situation from happening. Again, there's never something where you have to do something if your guidelines are not in place. For instance, if we don't have staff for a period of time, we can take and say, we don't have staff for this time, this event has to be canceled. We don't have to take and go into those situations. It's regrettable when we do. And people say, wow, well, you got to take and keep it open even if you don't have, like, your full staffing. No, we do not. And then secondly, again, when we speak about supervision accountability, everyone has the same accountability. There's no one who is above those basic accountability rules. Everybody goes through it, whether it's from the very top to the bottom. All right, let's move on. Again, can't say this enough. We cannot assume that our church is not vulnerable, especially to the use of, especially from an attack that's going to be motivated by the impact of Satan or others. In fact, the more effective your church is, the more likely that you are going to have something, because those are the ministries that people, both that people don't like, those who might be against the church. It's also the things where, again, if Satan is prowling around for prey, he's going to try and make the biggest kill he can, even if it's a small one. We just can't assume that we're not vulnerable. All right, now we're going to go on to our reporting obligations. So the reporting obligations, we have a procedure, is simply the fact that fact that it needs to be reported promptly. If we go through our church reporting procedures, we are, by state of Arizona, mandatory reporters. If we have reason to suspect, or if we become aware, well, I'll just read right out of a policy here, just to make it simple. In the event that an individual involved in the care of children becomes aware of suspected abuse or neglect under his or her care, it will be reported to the authorities as mandated by state law. Okay? Because people have tried at several points in time to sweep these types of things under the rug, and we've seen so many different cases where, well, I'm just think that I can handle it. There are now laws in place. If we have reason to suspect it, we have to report it to the authorities. We're not investigating it. They're going to investigate it. So now if we have questionable behavior, but we don't think that it maybe goes up to the level of abuse, well, we're going to report that promptly to the church leaders so they can continue to watch. If you have someone that, wow, this person just doesn't seem to work through the appropriate supervision, they're always like cutting corners, things like that. Or, you know what, this person just seems like they aren't behaving well. We do report that to the leaders properly so that they can be watching and letting other people know. So it has to be reported promptly. Next slide. Again, if we want to take and actually get Arizona CPS involved, or we want to know what the reporting laws of, you know what, I see this, is this actually a reportable incident? You can call SOS Child, 188 SOS Child rather, to get them involved. And it is a thing where we have to report it if we have reason to be aware of suspected abuse or neglect. We don't have any wiggle room there. Next slide. So all of our workers, we have a rule that the workers should be known by the church for 6 months. Again, we do background checks, but and we'll see that down there. The reason why we have this rule of that they have to have been known by the church for 6 months, in fact, as our policy states, no volunteer will lead a ministry involving contact with minors until they have been involved with the church for a minimum of 6 months. If involved in a ministry, they will not be counted towards the 2-adult rule. We'll get to the 2-adult rule in a minute. But background checks are great. Background checks catch the people that have offended before. It keeps people from applying who know they can't pass a background check. But the 6 months is you actually get to know someone of, is this person trustworthy to be around children? They could be able to pass a background check, but if you look at them, they're like, no, this person is not trustworthy to be around children. They don't follow procedure. They don't take things seriously. We just have to have that knowledge. Now, it's, again, our own personal background check, so to speak. Our worker application at this time pretty much is limited to the criminal background check that we take and run through Protect My Ministry. It'll also be that we have a signature that they've read and worked through the worker guidelines. At this point, we don't have a huge form for a lengthy form for a written application. Beyond that, we've been kind of working through some of that. Also, this annual training to take and remind us of this importance, because especially if something hasn't happened, we tend to pass over it. We tend to forget about it, become a little lax. One of the reasons why we do this is this. And again, there's also the fine thing that in our policy under E, disqualified persons will not serve. If we find something that disqualifies this person from being in children's ministry, it doesn't mean that they can't be at the church. It doesn't mean that they couldn't serve in the church in some way, but we are not going to have them serve with children. And you know what? Sometimes there are actions and consequences that run significantly beyond the actual offense. So it's not that the church isn't being forgiving about things, but we are being wise about things. Again, it goes back to that whole thing of you don't hand an alcoholic a bottle of booze. You do not take them into a liquor store. Those types of things. You don't bring someone into that situation. Does that mean you don't take and work with that person? Of course not. You continue to work with them. But there are certain things that just shouldn't be. All right, next slide. Supervision. Supervision is huge. One of the primary risk factors is supervision. Where supervision goes down, your risk level goes up. Remember our story of the two teenage kids that, or let's make it even more. You have a teenager and a preteen. Make a little bit of a change in the authority levels there. If they are, left alone, bad things can happen. If they always know that they're being watched by someone, they'll be on their best behavior at those points in times. So, again, supervision is huge as a thing. So this is why we have things like the 2-adult rule. If we take a flip to the next slide, I think that has that. Okay. So this just goes in. Basically, the risk increases as isolation increases. So we have the fact that we do not let children be unsupervised during church events. Now, as we are at the church, we cannot control everything. If, for instance, especially at the beginning and closings of events, you have parents that might let their kids run, or guardians that might let them be in some more isolation. But as far as we're able to, we make sure that there is no isolation. That's why we have a very open area here in the church. We try to eliminate blind spots, just places where people can be without without knowledge, without some type of someone seeing. For instance, you don't take a child off to another room to go to have a discussion or a prayer time. You find a quiet spot of a room where you can still be seen by everyone. Perfect case in point, when we've had our kids club, our verse time, our handbook time, it's a time when you're supposed to be working with these kids, building relationships with them. And it's a one adult with multiple children, or sometimes even with a single child. But we don't go off to a room to go and do that. For instance, when we do it here, we have 4 different corners of the room. So each leader will get a corner of the room. And so that you're there, you can have your more private conversation, as long as you moderate your voice and things like that. But you're not having a, let's go off someplace where we're isolated idea. We just don't want to take and have that. Accountability. Everyone needs to be taken and keeping each other accountable for things. That we are following procedure. That we are doing the things according to how we are supposed to do them. Because everybody gets lax. Everybody does eventually get lax of, you know what? We haven't had a problem. I don't need to worry about this so much. That's why we have more than one person working through this. One of the things that we work with, both isolation and accountability, probably one of the biggest things, is the 2-adult rule. Our 2-adult rule states, it's the goal that a minimum of 2 unrelated adult workers will be in attendance at all times when children are being supervised during programs or activities. So 2, so we don't have isolation, there's at least 2. And unrelated. So when this means unrelated, especially, this refers to like husband-wife teams, which sometimes can work out really well. But the thing is, legally speaking, a spouse is not allowed or rather not required, cannot be required to testify against their spouse. At least that's the way it works at this point in time. Now, if they actually see a crime being committed, they can choose to waive that right. But it's a little bit like attorney-client privilege kind of a thing. So the easiest way is just to make sure that there are not just 2 related individuals. That's why some people will ask, well, the pastor, well, why can't the pastor and his wife just do a children's ministry? There's 2 adults. You got a male, a female. It's all perfect, right? But because of the point of accountability, so if we had 2 adults, if we had my wife and I in something, we would reduce isolation, which is the fact that there would not be anyone alone. However, our accountability is decreased from a legal standpoint of that point. Now, you'll notice we have a few classes that only have a single teacher, especially on Sunday mornings. In those situations, where workers are related, the door to the classroom must remain open. So you can't have 2, but it's got to be related or open, and somebody else has to be there. In those situations where there's only 1 adult teacher in attendance during a class session or a youth class, the door of the classroom must remain open, and there must be no fewer than 3 students with the adult teacher. Children are not to be left alone with 1 adult unless it's a counseling situation, and only if they can be readily observed. Children are not to be left unsupervised during a class period. Again, there's multiple different levels there. We do understand that sometimes you cannot take and have 2 people in each class. But when that happens, that's why we have doors open. That's why we have windows in, for instance, the office door. When we redid our doors, we had a door with a window for the office. That's the reason why the window to the nursery there, that's one of the things that we take and continue. That is continued to be a unblocked window when we're having classes in there. Doors open, those different types of things, so that there is visible supervision back and forth. Again, when you have that window unblocked in either of those locations, somebody walks into the um, fellowship hall, and they can immediately see everything. There's not an isolation there, because you have that visual. You'll see this in schools. It's gone back and forth. They used to have a lot more windows. You'll see they had all the windows in the school to where there was always the ability to see in because they were dealing with this problem. Then they came to the issue of security and shootings, and they went back the other way because they didn't want the shooter to be able to see. But we are still on that point of visibility. We have to have that. And also we have a few people who take and go through, they walk through as basically a floater at various odd times, not like, on a watch of at 15 minutes after this, I'm going to go through, so that no one in that room knows exactly when someone's going to be looking in. It kind of increases that accountability. I love it if we had two teachers in every classroom and we didn't have to worry about some of those things. Yes. Definitely praying for that. At this point, we don't have that. Next slide. The goal of the supervision is to lower the isolation and increase the accountability. Again, we just kind of touched that a lot. I don't think we really need to go through we will go through this. One more thought before we get into our examples. Minors as volunteers. We do allow minors to assist in ministry under supervision of an adult worker, but they are not considered to be counting towards that 2-adult rule. Again, we can't take and just, throw a teen at it and say we've got another adult, because they're not an adult. That's not their responsibility, all those types of things. So even if we have child who might do a portion of a ministry, like I could turn over, leading this or that, activity, to a child or to a minor, that doesn't mean that they count towards supervision. We have to keep the same amount of supervision. All right, a couple of other just examples. 6-year-old walks alone down the hall to go to the bathroom during church. What's the dangers here? The dangers are, got some isolation out here. They're walking down the hallway alone. Could happen that there's not some isolation. It's not as much accountability for what goes on. So fortunately for us, we have our hallway here behind during church service. We always have someone at the sound booth or back there towards the back that can see down that hallway. That's especially important for us because that hallway has an outside door. What if the child walks outside? Now where are they? We don't know. What if someone's outside the door coming in and waiting? You're going to say, no, this could never happen. Well, the whole reason why some of these situations come up is because they have happened. Sometimes they don't happen because you've thought about them. So this is why it is ideal, especially if you have large groups of children, to have sort of monitored bathroom breaks where the adult stands in the hallway visible outside of the room and you go together. Everybody goes together, kind of a thing. Especially this works for like young, like the young elementary school students. The older ones, okay, as long as you know what's going on, Fortunately, all of our bathrooms are single-use bathrooms, so it's easy to determine only one person's in there at a time. Next slide. Talked a little bit about how to reduce the risk. All right, one of the youth workers volunteers to drive children home in his personal vehicle after a Saturday night event. What are the potential issues here? Isolation and accountability. Extremely isolated. It's a Saturday, it's a nighttime event. We're on our roads here, you're in the car. Nobody knows what goes on in that car. It's just the kids and this volunteer. There's extreme isolation there and not very much accountability. One ways that we can take and minimize that risk, and I've seen it used, is you have these different, we have the technology now to have a windshield cam, and a windshield cam that points back into the vehicle so that you have a record of what happened the whole way out. Now, most of them don't have audio, although some of them do, so you can hear what was said. But at least what was done, you have that ability. Maybe you take and put two unrelated workers in this vehicle if it's going to be a sponsored thing. This gets a little bit sticky because what if, the parents, at what point does it become not a youth worker, and when does it become just a parent transporting other kids? So I would say, now this is just what I would say, this isn't necessarily a legal definition. If it is a parent making an arrangement with another parent, then they are going to be responsible for that security, or to take and work that out, what their levels of trust are. If it is the church saying, hey, we can pick up your kids, we can do a van ministry kind of a thing, then it becomes a whole different level. I would say even if it is a parent taking other parents' children all alone, if it was me, I'd get the dash cam up for those things and just have a record of it. Next slide. Next slide. Again, we have a plan. We're not going to go through the entire plan. I'm trusting that people will have read it somewhat. But you follow the reporting procedure. We don't short-circuit that reporting procedure if there is something that happens. And everybody needs to know about it. This is not something that you keep hushed. You don't deny, don't minimize the situation. Don't say, well, the victim wanted it. And keep accurate records. This comes back to our check-in procedures. Registration. Sometimes we're like, wow, who wants to do registrations? Boring job, doesn't really matter. Those records can be invaluable. To take and say, if someone were to say, hey, on this date, this happened, we'll just say Joe had an incident with Jane. What's another good Jane? Anyway, if you have accurate records to take and say, well, actually, yeah, Joe was here on that day, but Jane wasn't. So they couldn't have had this issue. Those are important things. That's why we keep our registration records. Next slide. All right, we're kind of working through, I think now, more into our safety portion. Safety, security. I'm just going to touch on this briefly. The problem is that we do have people that come in. It does happen in churches where people who are upset come in to have problems, to cause issues within the church. Again, just recently in the news, you've had, I think there's one that actually has video, since a lot of services are recorded now, of a guy came in to come in and shoot the pastor or shoot others, and came in with a gun ready to take and come in. It does happen. And we need to be aware and watching out for these things as well. Next slide. We are dealing with it, whether we're dealing with it proactively or reactively. Again, it's always best to take and deal with it proactively when you can. Think, okay, how's this going to take and do? Because by the time you're reacting, you're always behind. In a situation like that, you're really not where you want to be. Next slide. You're watching out for, this person that comes in. If you don't know them, especially in a smaller church, if you know that they're making, they're extremely nervous. Now, sometimes, it's just a person who is not quite comfortable yet in the space. But at least you're going to be watching to take and see if this person is doing that. Did they come in with a trench coat someplace where they could easily conceal a weapon? Are they just zoned out, like they are just not here? Okay, we're going to take and watch that if they're completely unengaged. Next slide. If you know somebody, that's where if just somebody comes in. If you know that there's a triggering event outside, relationship trouble, job loss, broken people living broken lives, anger at the church, anger within the church, do you know that this person, has a lot of anger at someone else, and you know what? They just threatened to, hurt somebody. They have an anger issue. They have, again, domestic violence issues that you're aware of. They can have these things that trigger them. They could have been perfectly fine, but they just snap. This is where knowing some of those things, also in children's ministry, knowing what the relationship is between the parents. Again, if you have, let's just say you have a father bringing the children into the church, but he's in the middle of a terrible custody dispute with the mother of the children, and she's very, very angry, and she comes in and she's going to try and snatch the kids. This is where we need to know some of these things, like, is there an issue with someone else picking up the kids? That's why we have on our intake form, who else is allowed to pick up your child. If that name's on there, you can't take a get authorization. I mean, we could if we took and had a phone call and they said, yes, I forgot to do it, and we get that authorization. But you just don't, let anybody pick up the child, so that things like this can't happen. Usually people who know that they're in this situation, they'll let you know that. But again, keeping tabs on some of these things just to know what are these triggering events that could happen for this person to send them over the edge. Next. If we're responding to something like that, a safety security problem, then prevention has failed and we're looking for the next best option. Whether it's finding a room, finding a way to keep people safe, trying to lock down doors, all these things, that's our next best option. In our facility, that can be really weird because we have a lot of windows. I love the windows. They give us views to the outside. Maybe if you know somebody's coming to the church, you take and put on all the shades. All the shades go down. We try to minimize that impact. Make sure doors are locked. Isolate the facility. Isolate the people. Figure out, know which doors can be locked to take and, be taking care of these things. And obviously report suspected or that someone's coming in with either a threat, something like that. We're going to report these things to the police and have them come to be here. We live in a place where law enforcement is usually not that far away for various different reasons, but we are going to report it. So, and finally, we need to take and be thinking who's going to take and make that phone call. This works also for safety and security of someone's having a medical emergency. One of the first things they tell you in first aid is they don't say, call 911, because then everybody's going to assume somebody else. You choose, you're going to take and call and talk about the situation. You're going to be the one talking about this. And you choose, whenever possible, who can give the accurate description of everything that's going on, the circumstances, the people involved, what steps we've locked down we've locked down the church, and everybody is in the sanctuary side. So if you see somebody in that other side, that could be, not who we're hoping to have. Or we say the fellowship side. We're in the fellowship side, and so anybody over in the sanctuary, that's not, as far as we know. Those are just things that law enforcement would need to know in a situation like that. Again, same thing, medical emergency. We're going to be in the front doors here. At this point, that's where they'll be. Or if it's a medical emergency, who's going to be out in the parking lot to help flag them down to take and get the EMTs the fastest way into the victim? So, again, very important. All right, next slide. Questions, comments, we're not really going to take and have too many at this point in time. Again, church activities, this is why leadership has to improve activities that are that the church does, because we have to consider all of these things. Not only do we have to make sure it's biblical activity, but also we have to take and make sure, can we take and mitigate risk for these different things? I know it sometimes makes things slower, but we do it because it is safer that way. Next. We've established our written guidelines, our policy, so that we have something that this is what we do. And sometimes we have to continue to upgrade that or bring in new guidelines if we're wanting to do something new. Next. Figure out that there is monitor and supervision of the event. That's why not just for this case, but if we have anything at the church, it's required that there be a member of the church that is part of it so that it can be appropriately supervised to know what's going on in the building. Again, we don't have as much as some, but it's important. Next. Again, as I said, consider the level of hazard and how we're going to minimize it. The higher the risk, the more supervision. Again, if you have different activities, different things that you're doing, you might need more adults for a specific activity than others. If you're just having a weekly meeting, you know what? One adult could handle maybe 15 kids. If you're taking and going out into the wilderness, you're not going to take and have, you're going to have a need for more supervision. Why? Because, you know what? You might not have a chance to just call the phone and hang out there. You might have to send somebody. Well, that means you're going to need more people with them, more chances to walk off. If you're at a, so again, some of these things are dependent on the situation. Next. Again, we doing a lot of these things, play it safe, keep all these things not just alive, but thriving, helping these things to thrive. Again, we don't have a whole lot of these, but it's good to take permission slips, release medical forms, make sure that all those things are there. Keep the phone numbers so that we can make those contacts. Make sure that everybody knows in writing exactly what we're going to do. So no one says, well, I thought we were going to do, and then it turned out to be this. Also, as a youth administrator, you can't really change it in the middle. So I can say, well, this is what I said we're going to do. Now we're going to do this. No, this is what we said we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. Or we're not going to be able to do anything. All right, next slide. Again, always use a worst-case scenario to identify any potential hazards. And train your leaders to be proactive, to stop something before it becomes dangerous or becomes a problem. This is the same across all levels of supervision. This is when you have your leaders in a youth intermixed with youth out of activity, so that if this person's picking on that one, that person can step in, separate them, do whatever needs to be done before the kids start getting tempers and they start having an all-out fight. But yeah, if you're a youth leader, being proactive to not just sort of be there and then you have to say, wow, I never thought it would get to that. Well, were you actually looking at it? All right, next. And one more. We're not going to do this is a good example. You're on a youth outing. Half the people want to take pizza, half want to go hamburgers, and the hamburger place is across the street. You have kids walking across the street, busy street, boom, fatality. You can reduce or eliminate this by saying we're going to take and have lunches that we're going to have to do. We're not going to be walking across the street. Or you could say, you know what? This time we are having pizza. I don't care if you want hamburgers. If you don't want pizza, you can take and wait till you get home. Or something like that. You could have the vehicle make 2 different stops. All those different things to eliminate it. Or at the very least reduce it. Next. I think that is it. Well, hopefully this has been informative. If you have further questions, you can always contact me if there's something that we didn't cover. And I just, again, we do hope and pray that our activities will be God-honoring, fruitful, and safe and uneventful. Have a great day.